Today is April 18th, 2023. Welcome to Native Calgarian. Oki naganago mekoche chestokom aki, or in my language, dekots nogotine siku. Hi, my name is Red Thunder Woman. My married English name is Michelle Robinson, and I use she and her pronouns. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Great Bear Lake tribe in Treaty 11. My name is Dekots Nogotine Siku. My people wore rabbit skin, so it's been referred to as the land of the hare people, which I just recently found out that you're not supposed to bring rabbit into a lot of Blackfoot ceremony. So that matters because my moccasins have rabbit on it, so I need to make myself Blackfoot moccasins. Anyway, I'm a native to Turtle Island, and my Dene Nation is a visitor to this area of Clincho Tine Indahe in Satu Dene, meaning many big dog town, named after the Calgary Stampede. I was born in Calgary, or in Blackfoot Mokinstis, as Michelle Elliott, an English name which has afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. My mother is Northern Slavey Dene, or Satu Dene, but my Indian Act imposed status card by the Canadian government says Yellowknives Dene. Through my father, I am a daughter of the Mayflower and a daughter of the American Revolution, while being a Canadian and having an Indian Act card. That is a colonial construct by Canadian policies meant to divide Indigenous peoples' inherent rights. Indigenous Two-Spirit, or the Indigenous 2S LGBTQ plus community, and Indigenous women are at the bottom of the Canadian socio-economic ladder because of colonial trauma, imposed poverty, gendered violence, and land theft. I do not speak on behalf of all Indigenous, but I share my journey as I walk the red road. As a Dene woman who has attempted to run, joined harmful colonial parties, spent money to be at expensive conventions, left my home to travel to those conventions just to vote on incomplete policies that still allow incarceration, denial of justice, a denial of health services, child theft, racism, colonial trauma, and genocide of Indigenous and Black peoples. I have worked to continue, reports to advocate for, and attempt to work within these systems meant to harm me and my community. I think of all of this today, and I hope we honor the many Indigenous lives lost for this so-called country named Canada. I hope you see your role in the importance of stopping harm, and as a citizen, see your role in reconciliation and as a treaty partner. Pride Month should never be 1 month. It is important to understand that the straight agenda and gendered violence was and is forced on this land by Christian outsiders. Land acknowledgements are critical for creating a safer space for Indigenous, as well as honoring the host as a guest and acknowledging your role as a treaty partner in a so-called time of reconciliation. It's also important your land acknowledgements have that meaning. I encourage everyone to introduce themselves, acknowledging their ancestors, stories of displacement, how you perceive your role as a treaty partner, a citizen of Canada, a refugee, or other land displacement, so we as Indigenous people know how safe you are to be around. If you won't pronounce your local Indigenous nations' names, won't pronounce your pronouns, won't say your story of origin, won't acknowledge stolen lands, won't acknowledge imposed economic oppression or your role in reconciliation, I determine how safe you are to be around my community, my family, and myself. Understanding land acknowledgements and their importance is Indigenous 101 because it immediately addresses colonialism, oppression dynamics, broken treaties, and lies taught today in Canadian schools nationally. That's why settlers and those who call themselves Native Calgarians or whatever town you're from show me you have no Indigenous 101 understanding. Jesse Winty's book, Unreconciled, explains it perfectly, as do many other Indigenous authored books. Land Back is a movement that could save the planet from climate change created by colonialism, but it would be a part of a treaty partnership, meaningful reconciliation, and honoring global initiatives like the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I honor the Blackfoot as the elders and members have been so kind to me on my Red Road journey. Elder Red Crane taught me how to pronounce my spirit name in Blackfoot, and Leonard Kenny taught me how to pronounce my name in Satu Dene. My humblest apologies to the Blackfoot and Dene elders and language keepers as I try to learn proper pronunciation. I'm speaking to you on the lands of the Niitsitapi, which is the Blackfoot Confederacy. The Blackfoot south of the imposed US-Canadian border are the Blackfeet, and north of the border are the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani of the Confederacy. These lands are Treaty 7, signed September 22nd, 1877, with signatures that include the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Wesley Chiniki and Bearspaw Nations of the Stoney, and the Dene from Tsuut'ina. I acknowledge all First Nation, Métis, Inuit, status and non-status across Turtle Island as the keepers of these lands, all non-Indigenous or treaty partners with the government signing on your behalf. And I'm already reminded of something funny that happened earlier today. It might have been a couple of days ago, actually. We were talking about making deviled eggs and putting some pepper on and some, I said Gainai pepper. my daughter looked at me and started laughing, and we had a good laugh because apparently I acknowledged the Gainai Nation before I acknowledged pepper properly, so that was pretty funny. Anyway, my Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. For those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com. Send in your comments or your questions. Also, giving a review helps, whatever medium you're listening from. Please know that the truckers have found me and are not giving me kind reviews. I have a YouTube channel where you can go and subscribe. Go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. And I'm so excited today to introduce my friend Tyson. I'd let you introduce yourself in your way and tell my viewers who you are.
Great. Thanks, Michelle, for having me as a guest. I've been a longtime listener and just like a stan of Michelle Robinson. When you, running for the election as well, and just like the value of your wisdom that you shared, and just all of the things that you do in community, and I've really trusted your wise direction in different ways over the years as well, with the things that I've been getting up to. I think you just have a really, anyway, this is a great little chat. But my name is Tyson Bankert. I go by he, him pronouns. I was adopted from Jamaica without very little connection with my ancestors, but due to colonization, I'm sure Western Africa at some point in that lineage there. My parents are white settlers who came to Alberta in different ways, but so I grew up here in Mohkinstsis, and as one of only me and my younger brother, who was also adopted later on, as only kind of two Black people I knew growing up, for the most part here, was interesting for sure. And for me, realizing just the complexity of race and my sexual identity, my upbringing in religious systems and my family systems, these systems that really, I think, are the foundational aspects of who we become. And as like a man in my 30s, it's always been interesting to kind of unpack all of that as we go through. But I'm someone who is a facilitator, a community builder. My personal slogan is to promote justice, edify others, and befriend the lonely. And so I'm really glad that these values that I hold really are in line with the ways in which I practice labor here in the city. And I am someone who is very passionate about climate justice, land back, the ways in which I think we understand this is occupied territory, and like what that looks like to be in solidarity with those who also agree, like yourself, and what that means for us to be in communities of care with one another. I'm very interested in also playfulness and having like joy. Like, what are the things around like that provide me pleasure, that are removed from money, really, and like those are things I can really tap into. But yeah, that's like a little bit about me. And Yeah, I think I just want to like kind of comment on even our relationship a little bit, because there was an opportunity that happened. Someone, without maybe getting too much into it, but there was an organization that wanted to do like a um, a BIPOC uh, like training for like an anti-racism training. It wasn't called this, but it was like DEI something or whatever. But it was an anti-racism training for like businesses so they can be welcoming spaces.
Yeah.
And I was like, I know these people, and I wasn't really always sure. So I called you up and I was like, hey, like, what are your thoughts? Like what's your experience? And I mean, in the kindest way possible, it was like that's a red flag, don't do it. And I remember being like, okay, good thought. Like I'll definitely consider that. But like I was like, no, I'm going to just trust everything Michelle just said to me and just say no
Yeah.
to being a part of it, to being a part of it, and to be part of this kind of initiative. And so that's kind of like how I've always sort of like, I guess, like seen you in my life as someone who has this like really great like understanding of how certain dynamics work, and characters of others as well. So it's kind of a little bit of just where I feel like our relationship is. But
Yeah, well, just to tell my listeners, this is one of my favorite people in Community because one, he actually laughs at my jokes. So let's start
you
there.
are funny. It really is.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
well, but you have to have humor about it, right? Because
you
like
do.
sometimes, and we were joking beforehand, like you're like, this is really happening and nobody sees the ridiculousness of this.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, and funny enough, just before we got started, I was reading this story about a Calgarian that's going to have his ashes or something sent to the moon, and it said right in there a Calgarian native. So I was like tagging the article, being like, "Hey, is there any way we could just call him a Calgarian? Because whenever I see native, I just ask, what nation are you from?" And it's just so funny because after all of these years of having a podcast and telling people that out in Community, like you still see it quite normalized in the way it's written in just regular articles for news and such. And I'm just like, I just assumed with all of this so-called diversity training, equity, inclusion, and which I jokingly say is die, right? If you
Yeah.
switch it that way.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. In that order too, by the way.
Yeah. But honestly, I think a lot of people don't understand the racial battle fatigue it is to try to talk about things with people who are actually committed to misunderstanding you, with folks who will purposely ask questions that they know are hurtful and offensive to a person that just said this is hurtful and offensive. So that's why, of course, we charge people for that type of education. And at least by having this podcast, I can have that barrier. So for folks who are just committed to misunderstanding, they're not going to pay me. But at least for folks who are interested and maybe don't have the cash, or for me, it's just talking is healing. Maybe that will help them understand a different point of view for once, as opposed to their very structured colonial white supremacy, Christian, we're right, everybody else is inferior belief system, which I was raised with, and my dad, he's white, and we did not talk about racism other than, those other natives, like
Right.
always looking down on other natives. And of course, like as an adult, you're unpacking that, and it's like, no wonder I had so much internalized shame as a native, as a woman, because a lot of misogyny came out in that time as well. And so there's a lot of that gendered violence just with regular language. So for me, it's just been slowly unpacking all of that and trying not to be a harmful person when I'm out in Community, but I still do it sometimes. And I try to correct myself. We have a mutual friend who just had a baby, and I was going to say nursing mom, and then I corrected myself and said nursing parent, because it's immediate. Like now when you start going down that road of unpacking, right? So
Right.
yeah.
And I think like that the power of language is so important, and like some of the work that I get to be involved in is like when we talk about like like people are so scared of making mistakes, right? And like I don't want to make a mistake. And then I go, well, if you're making mistakes and you're feeling a type of way about it, where are your relationships to be called in, to be to have that grace for, I mean there's a point, mind you, but also it's how are you in relationship with people that you can actually go, is like, what does this mean for you when I say, or what's this language or understanding based on your experiences, because I'm in a relationship with you. I don't want it to be impacting. I don't want to cause harm. And I think so many people are, and then I always ask myself, well, if you're making constant mistakes, like, where are the people that are checking you? Are you allowing yourself to be checked? And then are you then responding to that in a way that's meaningful to then not do it again? And like it's a constant loop, but that's what it means to be in a relationship with people. And I'm
Mhm.
always like wondering where that, for some folks who get really caught up in like, well, lots of things, right? Around this, and then just call it identity politics, like as if it's like a bad word because they don't want to handle it. And I go, okay, well, then I guess we can't be friends.
Yeah, well, and
Yeah.
that's just it. And like when I hear somebody use the term woke in a derogatory way, like I
Mm,
can't be friends with somebody like that because clearly they don't understand that's like an anti-black sentiment. But
totally.
also like I watched a great TikTok by a fellow, and he actually talked about how a little later the conversation about woke kind of evolved, being more inclusive of other oppression dynamics, but
Hmm, hmm,
ultimately it's still rooted in
hmm.
being anti-black, right?
Totally, absolutely. Yeah.
So, for me, I just don't have a lot of, there's just some deal breakers no matter what.
Mhm,
So I've noticed that I've really had to limit who's in my circle, who's in my space. I block all the time. Every morning I wake up and I go through all my social media and block all of the negative comments, because
mhm.
you can't, I mean, life's too short, and I
Yeah.
don't want my daughter, I don't want my community seeing those awful comments.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
yeah, it's just kind of, you just got to be careful about who you let into your circle and based off of the language. And there's
mhm,
an expression in the Indigenous community about words of medicine, right?
mm,
And but also words are weapons. So,
mhm, mhm,
and
mhm,
even I don't mean to always misuse my words, but sometimes we do. So
mhm,
it's
mhm,
hard to make sure you're saying the right thing. But I see
mhm,
a lot of people who have done oppression dynamics, that road of understanding, really be careful with the words they use.
mhm.
And now I understand why. And it took me a long time to get here for sure.
Yeah, it is a, uh, I mean, I when I hear of the gay agenda or the woke agenda, I think to myself like, oh yeah, I'm for that. Even and it's like,
Yeah.
and it's just like how easily it can, like, we were talking earlier about just sort of, like you said earlier, like, am I on a different planet right now? Like, am I, or do people? And it's like you like that a one word or a particular experience can be interpreted in a very different way, right? I mean, we have people here, um, um, uh, in Mohkinstsis who, you know, think Calgary will last forever, right? Like, or like this idea of who we are is going to be on and on and on, even though people, and it's like that. This like our history is somehow, um, people have a very different perspective of what that is, or understands, or isn't willing to look at the whole picture of all of the things. And um, what a different world that would be if we were able to actually like unpack and
Yeah.
uncover like all the different layers of who we are as an individual, as community members, as people living on this Turtle Island. And anyway, it's,
But the
and language
rhetoric
is a part of that.
matters. Like I hear it, especially with the so-called Sovereignty Act.
Mm-hmm,
At the end of the day, Albertans still don't understand treaty. So
mm,
to them, they have a different perspective of ownership of the province
yeah.
than, not sharing with Indigenous.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm,
like a reminder to everybody listening that the province was never negotiated with treaty. It was
mm,
imposed. So we have a treaty with Crown, which is Canada, but Alberta themselves seem to think that they are somehow absolved from that, but they couldn't exist here without that federal treaty. So it always comes down to that. And yet,
Mhm.
when you read the rhetoric that's out there, when you read how people are discussing this conversation, like it is very clear they don't understand they are treaty partners. So,
Mhm.
kind of back to that conversation of occupied land, they don't understand that Alberta was imposed, it is an occupation. And because there isn't, equal revenue sharing, equal
Yeah. Yeah.
opportunity, we are not good treaty partners. We're not in good relations. So, like, that
Eh,
language matters and how I see it being depicted in media and such. And I mean, there are calls to action and calls to justice for media. Very clearly, they are not reading it or implementing it or have the spirit of it.
mhm.
So, like, these are real issues about language and
And
the assumption of white supremacy, frankly.
yeah, and back to the notion of like when you read it in the newspaper on a native Calgarian going to the moon, it's like, wait, do you have you thought about that as and in context of the calls to action of what you can need to be changing, or even when we talk about like land acknowledgements, to me it's so much of um to me it's acknowledging that this land has been taken over by someone else.
Yes.
As a quote that I think I heard actually, paraphrasing from a podcast I just listened to on the Sprawlcast actually over this past weekend. It
Yeah.
was like this is why we no, I say we as in everyone's doing it, but like this is why I come to understand why that is an important piece to just that 101 that you speak so to.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. We were talking a little bit about our upbringing, and you kind of talked
Mhm,
about being adopted into Calgary. What
mhm.
was growing up in Calgary like for you?
Yeah, I think for me it was. I mean, I think my childhood generally was a really good one. I guess I think I think I reflect on it thinking really fondly of it. So I say all of that to say like that's in my bones. I feel it as being a really great childhood. But as you get older, you tend to go reminisce of some of the moments that weren't so kind and weren't so great. And I'm so glad I get to be at an age where I can like actually reflect on that and have some distance from.
Yeah.
But yeah, like as I said, being kind of my 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 early family structure was that of my parents did a lot of foster care, so there was a lot of they were foster parents, and so although I was adopted and they adopted a few other children who were also like racialized as well. Um, but then also were part of a system that I think really doesn't provide the support, does not. I mean, to biological parents, to foster parents, to the children,
Yes.
um, like most importantly. Uh, so I think when it can be very chaotic,
Mm,
to say the least. And I think I think all of that has made me a very like a lot more caring, more understanding person,
yeah.
a lot more of an independent person, because I think at times I had to kind of remove myself from what was at the time as a young person chaos.
Mm,
Um, uh, and I think living here specifically, I think it knowing so quickly that for me racism really came out from in I don't know if it's the right word, but juxtaposition to my parents. So people, for example, would say, "Oh, those are your parents? That's not possible." I say, "Oh, well, why is it not possible?" Oh, because they're white. It's like, "Oh, well, I'm adopted or whatever." And then it would be, "Oh, well, where are you from?" And I'd be like, "Jamaica," but I, was came here at 4 months old. So I have no like there's no real connection there per se, especially at that time.
sure.
So it would, but it was like, "Oh, how are you doing? How are you feeling? How's," and like, it's really not. I'm not. Please, other me in different ways if that's what you want to do. But I'm not.
Sure.
So there was always a lot of unpacking around
Yep.
that component, and then I also think like I said, kind of living in a lot of different chaos there too. I think my folks weren't really incredibly um aware of, I think, what it means to also raise like a black man too,
Sure.
and like at all. I think it was maybe like in my 20s when I was writing a paper in university for a class on racism, that me and my mom actually had like a very like frank conversation about it. And I was like, oh, we
Sure.
have never had this before. Or even just like, even really other things where people would say, when my parents went to adopt my younger brother, um, you know, the assumption was that they had found my biological younger brother, because why would you want another one? Right. And so like that, those were kind of the things in the language that we, I think, as a family didn't really ever get to discuss or unpack.
Mm,
Or even just like small things like, I had a book that was like I guess like it was a tourist book about Jamaica. But I remember always opening it and being like, oh, like interesting, like that's, I mean, and obviously it was just the beaches, right?
yeah,
But
the pretty
but
part.
like, yeah, the pretty part, the part that the white people go to take the pictures and then leave, right? So like
Yeah,
that was my understanding of it. But even just like things around hair, or things around my
sure.
they call being able to really frame like how systemic oppression works as it relates to the education system or sports, or like just like being in a neighborhood, and like that sense of belonging, that I think oftentimes, now I know wasn't really maybe nurtured or like helped support in a way to like help me kind of navigate those things. But yeah,
Yeah.
we but that, and make it sound like you can sit and go, oh well, the parents should do a better job. But I also think it's also we live in a system that doesn't do that actively ensures that folks like ourselves don't belong, and that the systems do inherently push and make things harder for us.
Yeah.
So it's like, um you know
Well, I respect
yeah.
where you're coming from. It's really hard. I love my dad unconditionally.
Totally, yeah.
Like, there's no question about that. But does that mean he was able to prepare me for the racism and misogyny that I would experience in
Hmm.
life?
Hmm.
No.
Hmm.
And that's not because he's like, I mean, out of all of the things we screw up as parents, me being one of them,
Hmm. Hmm.
I know it's a lot. And he was going through a divorce and court systems
Totally,
and
yeah.
such too, so that makes it hard. And I would imagine trying to adopt a child is international paperwork, and you have your own struggles trying to make sure that everything is good and squared away. But
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be having more conversations in this whole conversation of anti-racism, and this
Hmm.
whole conversation of equity, of not just dismantling, all of, and I talk about it in my podcast all the time, like
Yeah, you
every
do.
institution, everything, every
Yes.
conceivable part, including family structure, including within
Yes.
your
Yes.
family, having
Hmm.
that conversation. Like I have family members that are supposed to be like the ones I rely on, but these are not conversations we would ever have as a possibility. And some of my white relatives, like they've really distanced themselves from me
Hmm.
ever
Hmm.
since I've been openly talking about
Hmm.
racism. Right.
Hmm.
It makes
Yeah.
everyone uncomfortable.
Hmm.
But I've seen a great
Make him
TikTok.
uncomfortable.
Right. I've seen a
Yeah.
great TikTok, and it's like, in all relationships, you have conflict. In all relationships, you have to work on these things.
Hmm.
So I just really encourage my listeners to look at, what that means. Like, how are we really supporting BIPOC within family structures?
Yeah.
And for, Black families, I see that on TikTok all the time where they say, we have to have the talk with our children
Hmm. Hmm.
from day one. This is what you can expect from this white supremacist culture. And I know a lot of folks who are in the white settler colonial world are like, oh, we don't want to talk about racism and make our
Totally.
kids uncomfortable. But we as BIPOC are living are living it.
Hmm.
We're living
Hmm.
that uncomfortableness because they won't dismantle the structures in education, health, family, social, church, all of that, right? Like
Absolutely.
it's in every aspect that there
And
is.
I think there's all these like really small, like there's these small moments that I think when we provide conversations in our family systems to be able to, and family being very, very nuanced as well, but the
Yep.
people that we're close to, and
Yep.
saying like, that's not appropriate, or like, so okay, an example of this is like growing up, so when I came here as a kid, like as a 4-month-old, a woman came to like physically like take me to my parents, and she was from Jamaica, and so I mean, yeah. And and it was, the running gag or the joke was kind of like, oh, like, she had her parka on, or she was, doing particular things, and but like and always asking lots of questions, and wasn't really sure about like what kind of family she was dropping me off to. And I think, and as I get older, and I went to Jamaica actually, so just to kind of like, I don't know, like, get some perspective. Uh, the notion actually was that like, well, for all she know, these people were gonna have you as like a servant or a slave,
Right.
right? So she wanted to make sure that this was legitimate.
Sure.
And thinking like that, I mean, that is some seriously deep shit.
I'm
What,
going to throw it
wait,
to you in
and
the other way too, Tyson.
yeah,
I
yeah,
know Indigenous people who thought they grew up in loving families, but were othered into a different section of the house at a
absolutely,
different
yes,
table
yes,
to eat dinner, and they thought they were loved.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So I feel you on that.
yeah. And so I think we just have to, and I remember talking to someone who was telling me sort of like, oh, well, that's just sort of the attitude we Jamaicans have about adoption, just generally international adoptions.
Sure.
And to them it was like, and I remember her saying, oh, like when I was saying, oh, like I'm here, blah blah blah, because I'm adopted, blah blah. And she then said, oh, I don't really approve of adoption. And we just kind of, and I sat there being like, oh, I was like, tell me more about that, because I've never in my entire existence heard a different idea of what that looks like. All I've heard
Sure.
is, oh, your parents must be so great. Oh, your parents must be like white saviors. That's great. Like you must owe them so much. And now, don't get me wrong, my parents don't have that attitude, but that was the attitude that other people put on
Sure.
our family structure. And I was like, oh, tell me more about why that is the case. And it was a matter of like, well, sometimes parents are like it's a matter of poverty. It's a matter of um of like we want our like, do they know about their heritage, their Jamaican heritage, and like all of the horror stories of this happening, of them, of especially with this person telling me like that they never really knew about when, like that it could end up really really bad, like they are a servant or whatever, right? And like
Yeah.
that kind of, and those sorts of like abuses that happen, and there's not much that they can do about it because the system there goes, well, they're going to pay us a lot of money, so we'll just take it. And then also there's so many vulnerabilities there, right? And so it was just like, I think it's be able to broaden out that conversation of all of, and allow for us to identify those small things that end up happening, that years down the road you go, oh, I can't believe that happened. And
You
then
know,
yeah,
and I'm going to throw this out to my listeners, especially because I want more engagement, obviously, from the people who care and listen. And I want to ask people what their thoughts on adoption are, that they realize later maybe needed a little more nuance or deconstruction. And if you were a child that was adopted or maybe foster care, like don't hesitate to reach out. And I'm saying this too, thinking of today I was on TikTok and tagged in this
yeah, yeah,
video,
mm,
yeah,
I
of
saw it. Yeah, sorry.
another
Yeah, yeah,
child apprehension in
yeah.
Manitoba.
Hmm.
And I know a lot of these provincial governments are saying, no, we don't have birth alerts and we're not stealing
Hmm.
children. And it's
Hmm.
like, yes, you are still stealing our children. And yes, we still do not have structures to really be able to fight the system, because
Hmm.
you have to default to that or go to jail. Like that is the truth.
Hmm. And
So go ahead.
yeah, no, I was gonna say, I mean, even in that TikTok video, the quote that I was so like, it was straight out of a movie of like, give us your baby, or and then we'll explain. That
Right?
to me is so, it's like, what kind of like, how dare, like, I don't know, it's just it
Right?
really, but it makes you it makes me really reflect on just how, I mean, so many things, but I
Mhm.
think um the opportunities for specifically Indigenous women to raise their children in a way that like it doesn't like that, all that money, all those resources in that small little moment, what could that be doing to support that baby starting off well? I mean, one, just don't even be there. But two, it's like,
Right.
what does that look like? And can we reimagine something different? I think
Right.
so, but obviously there's some folks out there who see it a particular way.
It was such a great
So
example
violent.
too of that white supremacist belief system. Like You really
Yes.
do not have the right to raise your own child. And it's like, we talk about the genocide, the ongoing genocide. Here's a great video of it. And they still don't want to see this truth. They still allow it. And I keep telling people in my teachings that, just as you kind of look back and you wonder, how did your grandparents or great grandparents think Indian residential school was okay? I want you to realize that your grandkids are going to be judging you for the children that are being apprehended today. And a lot of Canadians like, oh, well, suck it up, princess. This is what's happening. And MMIW is that pipeline. If someone came and stole my child, I'm not promising I would stay sober and like I wouldn't care.
Yeah, totally.
You've lost the only thing that matters to you. And how it is that settlers cannot see that, comprehend it, and go, yeah, you're right, that's wrong. Right now, don't get me wrong, I get a lot of comments on a lot of my social medias saying, like, I can't believe anybody would steal kids, let alone it being sanctioned by the government. And that's good, but we have to quit voting for people that think that this is okay, and we have to start dismantling these structures. So, like, I mean, without getting too much into the politics of each party. So.
But yeah, well, I think, like, I mean, ultimately, I think it comes down to when people say, like, what should we do, or why are, well, I would never become like this, or I would never be homeless, or I would never steal, or yada yada. And it's like, well, first, and I mean, even stealing alone is like a construct in itself. But the idea of, like, well, I always reflect on, well, my needs are being met. Like I can, my like, I would be doing particular certain things if my needs weren't being met. And so how do we live in a society, and have our government and not corporations? I could go down this road, but like, providing for us for our needs. And if those needs were met, particular ways of doing don't happen. And like, it's to me, it feels really clear to me. And I mean, I'm not really sure how. I mean, there's lots of ways how to do that when we talk about even just housing as a general human right. But like that, those are the things that's like, are those person's needs being met?
No, they're not. It was so hard yesterday. So my vehicle is in the shop, and I was walking home. It was so cold. The wind was howling. And of course, there's an encampment. And it's not the first time I've gone the same path and seen another encampment, but the last time there was a cop that came up at the same time and made them dismantle it. Indigenous woman, Black man in a little encampment. They dismantled it in front of me. So I was walking by and I seen this other one a little further, not so easily seen through vehicles. And I was like, no, you didn't. And I just kept going because, like, I always kind of see if they're around, and I couldn't see anybody. I didn't want to wake them up. And I would give them Narcan if they wanted it. But, I just didn't want to disturb them. What did I wake up to this morning? 12 hours ago or whatever, there was a fire right there. So their encampment was burnt up. So, and again, everyone's like, this needs to stop. And then I seen another articles that said they're going to forcibly put people with mental health issues in jails. Basically, they didn't say jails, but government facilities. And I interpret that as jail. But from my point of view, like, it's like, if you gave the fundamental right of housing, like, but I know they're trying to push these, prison and complexes on everybody. So if you're too poor, then we're just going to make money off of you by being in a prison. And that, like, I just cannot comprehend how people are okay with, profits being made in prison over just giving people housing. Like, it's incredible to me. And, people were mad. They're like, oh, this has to end. And I'm like, well, the money and resources that we use in the hospitals, that we use with fire, we use with police, that is easily absorbed into just giving people housing. It's been proven time and time again through studies that if you give somebody housing, it takes away all of those monies from all of those other services that are really unnecessary. Like, it's like a third of the cost. So why, if you are a fiscal conservative and only care about money, why wouldn't you just want to give housing?
And thinking about, we talk about how it's like, who we prioritize in the system of housing are essentially landlords who like to buy up as many properties as they can to make money off of. And it's literally a monopoly board at this point.
Yeah.
And like we need to, it's like, does anyone see this? I'm not sure, but
I see
think
you. I see this.
yeah, it's like yeah. And I think also when we talk about what kind of, we're ancestors in training, like what kind of people are we going to, like, we're going to look back on and say, like, I think what we will be reflecting on, wow, we actually were the kinds of people that allowed for like the idea of landlordship to be a thing, like people just being able to like work half of their income to then dedicate to someone else's mortgage. Like that to me, like I mean, I'm still working on this, but like I know, like, vegetarianism, veganism is something I definitely need to search it. But we'll look and go, oh wow, they ate, like they just interesting. Like I think there'll be conversations that we'll have in the future where we'll be asking ourselves, I can't believe that we did that. And I mean, but yet then I also am always here being like, but we're still talking about things that we did 100, 200 years ago and replicating the same thing, especially when we talk about indigenous children in care. So it's like I guess it's hard for, it just like reshaped itself in different ways oftentimes. And I think it's just so one of the things I've really learned from listening to you, and I'm sure you've said this, so it's probably something that you've actually said that I'm about to say, but has been like this notion of just like how important it is to have, I'm thinking about like not wanting, if I had ever had a child, to protect them from the systems of just really like, as soon as they get like they get a whiff of the name or whatever it is, like you're in it, and how dangerous it can be once you're there, because it can really start to spiral, as we see with so many people that we know and care about.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a really I think, and specifically here I think in Calgary, I was in Vancouver a couple of months ago, and it was really interesting to see how I don't even want the understanding of even just a little bit more, like the positionality and the way in which they were talking about the art of art and expressing the terror of the discovery of the grave sites.
Sure.
And I don't even say discovery. I mean, it was something that, anyway, but
Sure.
but like even I was like, wow, this feels so explicit and like public and intentional in a way that like, and maybe if you're listening and you're in Vancouver, you're like, yeah, no, it's not. But at least in comparison to what I see in Calgary, it's like, oh, there's a level. It's like a discourse in the public sphere of being able to talk about it and not willing to like hide behind that. And like the I guess like for some folks anyway, like, oh my gosh, like shock and surprise about it, and like I was like, oh, I wonder if there's still energy there. Like, where's the energy out of the, like, I feel like it's just kind of left. Or we talk about Black Lives Matter, or we talk about Stop Asian Hate. We talk about the thing that I think, in some ways were because of COVID and how it was, people were really fed up. Like, it's like, we're going to take this to the streets in some, hopefully some meaningful way.
Yeah.
And then now I feel like in the community work that I get to be involved in, it feels a little bit like it's been really, the air has been taken out of it. It feels very deflated. I wonder what your thoughts are.
I
mean, I
do
kind of know your thoughts, but I'm just
Yeah,
curious.
I know. Yeah. My like in Calgary though, it is so conservative here, right?
Right.
And there's a lot of money. Like the reason why I talk about on drip is because if we implement it here in Calgary, it would literally save people's lives, not just here, not just provincially, not just nationally, but literally globally, because we have so much fossil fuel and so much energy companies right here out of Calgary. So they know that. So the sooner they can stifle these conversations on equity, inclusion, diversity, the sooner that they can continue making money and profit over, Black and Indigenous peoples, whether locally, provincially, nationally, or globally, right? Because and my husband was telling me that even the banks have said the capitalism is dead. It is like
Mhm.
greed now at this point. And
Yes.
right. So
Yes,
and I mean this, like, it's here, it's right here in Calgary.
totally.
So I think the sooner that they can squash these conversations, the better. And like they're like my husband keeps saying, we got to get out of here because
Mm,
this place is so toxic. And he's not wrong. But I just think that that's colonialism too, in the sense
mm,
where it's like, so we have to pick up and go somewhere. Well, where do we go? There's
mhm,
no
mhm,
place that we're safe,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
So at
mhm.
least if I'm here, screaming all by myself on top of a rooftop somewhere saying implement on drip, at
Mhm,
least
mhm.
I know I'm in the right
No, I hear
place
you.
saying that. It's so hard because, like, kind of back to how we thrive, how we have joy.
Yeah, yes,
You
yeah.
kind of got to compartmentalize that over here, and then look at the things to, okay, talked about that 8 hours today. Let's focus on the next 4 hours of just enjoying my daughter, enjoying
Mhm,
life,
mhm,
enjoying whatever the movie is. By the way, I
mhm.
seen that movie with Dracula with Nick Cage. Oh my God, so great.
Yeah, I've heard it's
Yeah.
good.
But yeah, so I do think there's a quelling of that conversation here. And I know that they've had think tanks here that are top secret, quiet, with Daniel Smith, all the conservatives,
Yeah.
the K's, Tom Flanagan, those types of
Mhm,
folks.
mhm.
How do we do Indian denialism? Let's look at Indian or Holocaust denialism and make some parallels. And that's like their big go-to. And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
just think, what kind of loser you got to be to create a fake narrative and have these conventions to teach people these crappy talking points. And those things are really difficult, being in an atmosphere where your neighbor is like, rather than hearing the truth, and would rather listen to a false narrative and call me a sheeple, right? Rather than
Mhm,
doing the truth of treaty and
mhm,
understanding
mhm.
oppression dynamics and anti-racism, right? So like we are absolutely in a real, like, um yin yang, I don't
Rumble.
know. Yeah,
Yeah.
right here in Calgary, I think. And I don't think people really understand the gravity of it. So I feel you.
Well, I think like one thing that I mean, we both have experience in like the nonprofit industry, and I'm always just like, um, curious about like where we are working with our this industry is working with the most marginalized, most
Yeah.
equity deserving people, and it's this like rumble, I guess, of like, okay, well, we want to be able to like uh there's a couple of organizations that I know here in the city that I'm always like, yeah, we need to get out and vote. Just vote. It's like, but wait. But for what? Like, because I don't want to we shouldn't just be voting for anybody.
Yeah.
And just the people that the people that we are, it's still an oligarchy, in my opinion. Like, we only have a few people that we can vote for, and those people are the people that have been around forever and their parent, like, legacy building, all of these things.
Yeah.
But regardless, it's like, what should we be voting for? Because really, it's like, is it to keep your jobs, or is it to support the people that you are in quote supporting
Yeah.
in the work you do? And I think like there's no real, and I get that there's the Societies Act, there's the CRA, and all of these systems that really keep them from being able to do the work. And so it really ends up landing on a lot of folks like yourself in terms of having to yell and scream for the things that are really important without the systems that, like, because you, oh well, then that you're being biased, or you're being you have to be neutral. And so it's like, so it really is like the grassroots, I think, so much of this work in terms of how to begin building the change, because of these sort of bigger systems that are still at the bottom in a lot of ways in terms of their influence, and
Yeah.
still aren't really able to listen.
Right. And it's interesting when we talk about neutrality, and I see it,
Ugh,
like,
yeah.
especially in Indigenous reporting, right? Like, you
Mm,
have that nuanced conversation of actual what treaty means and what past court cases on land means, and the doctrine of discovery. But you don't have those conversations in mainstream media, and they have the audacity to talk about neutrality. And it's like, well, you're not even starting in the same point of us, right? Like, we are way over here on the spectrum, and you're reporting over here, and you think this is being neutral, and we're like way over here and trying to talk about it in this way, right? So, and there's no bringing it together, and they purposely exclude Indigenous voices from a lot of these panel discussions, roundtables, right? So you're not even getting sort of a nuanced conversation, let alone, folks who have any kind of understanding. Like, I think
Yeah.
of very few settlers that understand treaty, very few, right? And I don't see like a Sean Carlton on these panel discussions, right? And I just get so offended, frustrated, and just know it's garbage propaganda. And ironically, like right now, you have to fight for the NPR, you have to fight for the CBC, because the conservative media is really trying to make them sound like, oh, they're government state sponsored, and that is
Yeah.
somewhat true, I'm not going to
Yeah.
lie.
Sure.
But like they said, they do have independence and they don't have interference, and the last time they did was from Harper, etc. And funny how that gets missed.
Right. Well, I think it's I've been listening a lot to some of the news that I've been diving into the last couple of weeks. I can only dive into certain things and for
Sure.
so long.
Yeah.
But with the encampments that have been being taken down in Vancouver, it's been really interesting to see the conversation that CBC Vancouver puts out, and then what I see how APTN News and the video footage that they talk about. And
Sure.
it's like, I mean, now the production value is very different, right? Because of what money gets into it. So it's kind of it's a little hard to like,
not dollar to dollar.
Yeah, it's not dollar to dollar. But in terms of the stories that they're trying to tell about the impact of it,
yeah,
the nuance is so, it's so refreshing, even from when I've watched some of the footage from APN and the journalists there who are like showcasing and highlighting some of the ways in which this is impacting people completely differently from like, we like CBC Vancouver is like, we want to talk about like, oh, well, where are you going to throw your stuff after? It's like that, like, it's just so,
I know.
It's still trying to I think hold space for like conversations about really for like the white audience and their perspectives on it,
right?
Which I mean, I guess is like that's who they're centering, I guess, but then it's,
and then the CTV is
wild.
only like straight from the police talking points, right? Like it's just
exactly,
well, what did the chief say? Well, that's all that matters.
Exactly,
So
exactly. Yeah. Because they're the ones in power, so they're the ones that are going to be doing, it's like it's very frustrating. But
it is really frustrating. So, but I'm glad we can have this conversation to kind of like maybe implant these ideas into folks that are like, oh, I never thought of it that way. And it's like, they don't want you to. So can you listen to, and I encourage other podcasts on my podcast all the time, because my voice is one of many, right? But everybody has a different nuanced way that they look at it, and maybe we'll bring it in a way that they can respect and understand it. After listening to me for years, coming from there was two Crees in a pod, and they actually talked a lot about the toxicity of nonprofit. It was such a great one. Remind me and I'll send you a message with it. Actually, I'll try to link it into this so that people will hear it too. But it's such a great podcast on that. And it was another friend of mine who sent it to me, and I was like, oh, this is perfect. So, like I just wish people heard from more Indigenous voices. I wish I could have a sustaining podcast. They could have a sustaining podcast, but have more overlap in these CTVs, CBCs, Globe and Mails, so that there's an understanding. And I think of one of our best scholars is Dr. James Sinclair out in Winnipeg. And almost everything he writes for press is the Winnipeg Press, and it's always a paywall. Right. So I can never really read what he has to say. And I've been like, should I buy a prescription or a subscription, or should I not? And just because I think he's one of our best scholars, aside from a Pan Paul Mater or his father, our commissioner and former Justice Sinclair. So anyway, I got off on a tangent. I just want to say thank you thank you for being on my show. Is there anything else that you wanted to plug before I start giving out all these resources?
I think one of the things, and I think this is really just great chat for us to like an excuse for us to connect and
Yeah.
chat. And a couple of things that I wanted to plug for folks, and I'm really curious to know a little bit even more about your thoughts too. Is just like so as I help uh, I help support community development learning initiative. And
Mm.
so there we have an anti-racism decolonization learning and action team. And it's full of different folks from different experiences. Some are practitioners, some are not people in the nonprofit, some are just volunteers. And like one of the things that folks wanted to start doing was doing like a land acknowledgement. That was like the draft title, a land acknowledgement workshop, with the emphasis around like how do we actually help support people in really what you like. This is like 101. Like we want like there's different learnings that people have that they want to be able to do, but do we have like, are we holding space for people to actually think about what this actually means, to reflect on their own ancestry, as you so brilliantly say, but then also what that means for you to then make these steps towards this thing called decolonization. Like you can't like where, like you don't even know where to start from. And even when
Right.
I talk about, that's a practice that I think so many people are in some ways like afraid to do, or like,
Mhm.
oh well, we have the city of Calgary one that we'll share. And it's like, and every time that I share one, I always try and take that moment to also reflect on what have I been learning currently right now. What can I also share to add to this sort of this framework, but then also being able to add in my own, and like understand like what that means for me, because how I'm showing up, because I can't do everything. Like I can't like
Sure.
work like, but I have a particular, it's like what's my scope, of influence.
Yeah.
And so if folks were interested in doing that, it's called Reflecting on Land, Meaningful Land Acknowledgements, and we're doing it on May 8th. And it's specifically for settlers, though. It's like it is and partially, and I think the intention of that is to support like so much of this, and a lot of what I'm sure, I mean, I know that you have, is people will call upon you and say, hey, can you help us with this, or hey, can you do this for this, and the fill us with all of your knowledge and experience and wisdom without having done any of the work initially.
Yeah.
And it's like, and I mean, it's not levels by any means, but it's definitely a sense of, well, if you want to learn more about like Mohkinstsis or Fort Calgary or all of these other really important things about what it means to be on this land, you better first know why you're on this land and what that looks like. And
Right.
so that intention there, of giving people that space to also not have Indigenous folks hear all of the things about mistakes. Yes, the true spirit and original intent of Treaty 7. Read some books. There are plenty of things out there, right? And yeah, we want to be able to get like, because people are afraid of making those mistakes. And as a Black person in so many spaces that are supporting people in their efforts for anti-racism,
Hmm.
I sometimes think, oh, I wish I wasn't there to hear that.
Yeah. No kidding.
And
Yep.
so it's like, so also being really aware that that is a dynamic as well of, we could probably move we could probably move and help hold space for people without also harming the people that they're saying that they want to support in
Right.
these efforts. And so anyway, reflecting on land, meaningful land is something that's I'm helping co-facilitate.
Nice.
And also I love plugging just like there's quite a few different, and I'll send them to you, but like Jane's walks as well that's upcoming in the next couple of weeks. And I think like there's a
Nice.
lot of the interesting things for, it's like, I think an access point for people to also think and reflect on. I know there's a really great one that I've been able to go to on Nose Hill as well.
Mm.
And there's like I I think there's something about when we get to understand the land too, of how there's like a medicine wheel, and maybe you've noticed it, but it's kind of near um
Max Bell.
Maxbell. Thank you.
Yep.
Yes.
I've
Yeah.
seen that. Actually, Samantha and I were part of painting the rocks that
Right.
ended
With
up going
Lem.
on that. It was
Mhm,
Charlotte Yellowhorn. She was
mhm.
the one who kind of put that together, and it was in
Yeah.
conjunction with a scholar from U of L who did the same kind of concept there. And
Okay.
that scholar taught Charlotte so many things that she was like, she was so inspired. She had to do it here. And I
love it.
love it
I
because
love it.
it just, that's what we should be seeing more of throughout the
Yes.
city. Like
Yes, absolutely.
100%.
Mhm.
And it really meant a lot for me to see that because for folks who don't know, the Blackfoot Confederacy is like, they have this symbol of a circle
Mhm.
and it goes
Mhm.
into the 4 ways to talk about Pagani, Kainai, Siksika, and the southern part of like south of the US imposed border. That's the Confederacy. So that
Yeah.
basically painting these rocks and making that symbol and basically saying this is Blackfoot territory. And there's so many more teachings behind that. I'm not even going to do it sort of justice in this
Right.
conversation, but you can look this up if you're interested, for folks interested. And it's such a it's a great teaching, but that is real, like authentic symbology
Yeah.
of the people here, right? And like
It's
my tattoo, it's kind of like,
mhm.
kind of has those depictions in there, right? So it's a really important teaching from the U of L.
And I guess and I say all of that to say I think there's I encourage people who are listening, or maybe whether you're whether you're on Treaty 7 or not, but so like get out into the land and see what is there, because
Yes.
that I think is been such an important grounding for me
Yep.
to go like this, like that my relationship with the land and seeing that those who've been caretakers of it and showing up in what we just talked about, like that's super important to go
Yeah.
out of your way to go see, and like to like give a different perspective of like, oh, it's not just like, you know, um the max spells proper. I don't know, like I don't know all the, but like that, like it's super important to begin helping us think about and actively caring.
Yes. Yes. No, I'm
Yeah.
so
So
with you.
I
Yeah.
just say that, it's just like I think that's just something that's been something that's been really helpful in my own understanding and practice, on top of obviously like listening to you. But there's but yeah, that's just one thing that I encourage folks, if they're really interested, to
Interested.
like
Yeah.
care.
Yeah. No, and it's good. Like I think there's so many like fun community events that people can do just to remind themselves, especially if you're kind of stuck in this bubble, right? So if you're a
Mhm.
person that's like a little afraid to get out, maybe this will be the one thing you commit to, is a Jane walk or something. And there's something that the white settler world is doing about asking people to be citizen scientists for an initiative over the next week, and constantly going with the bees. So like there is so many things we can do as people to be like, hey, this is kind of important to me, and it's not too much out of our way. And it was something like just observing the type of birds and where they were at what time and what date, and sending in that data so that folks can compile it in a nonprofit. So like nonprofits could be more fun for sure than I sometimes give them credit, but it's also because
Yes.
I also see a lot of really toxic behaviors towards Indigenous people that are ah. And again, that particular group, if they would just team up with the Indigenous people, maybe they would see it differently. And I did hear of a really good initiative happening at the Kainai Nation, in conjunction with some sort of nonprofit, but that's another conversation for another day. But I love hearing that you're making space for people to really dissect land acknowledgements. I'll probably send that to the Reconciliation Action Group, because there'll probably be people there that will want to join it, or be those advocates that get to teach what they've learned from, say, the book club, and then
And
be like, hey, did you know? And then it's not
mhm,
you and I going, oh, why do we have to say this?
right. And it's been really great to also show up to things like what was I forget exactly what it's called, but it was challenging as protesting the CBE, for example, what about a month ago,
Mm,
that they did. And I went, I'm totally blanking on what it was called, but like just the around naming of the schools and things like this. And so it's just like I think there's also opportunity to like showing up is a lot of the work,
yeah,
in some ways. Like it really is, because then that's when you start to connect and what it means for you, and build a certain level of then capacity to keep engaging.
yeah.
So I'm so grateful that you show up for everyone and just, yeah, it's always so great. And so I'm so honored to just be a guest, on the show. And
you should have been on
yeah.
my podcast like 4 times by now. So I should have been pushing you more
No worries.
because you're like one of the best people in the city. Like there's so many great people, and you're just one of them that really help people in a gentle, kind way try to see a different perspective. And that's why I'm so grateful to walk this journey with you and be able to call you a friend at all. So
Likewise.
from my point of view, I just hope you know, I just am in such awe and solidarity in everything that you do. Anything you're doing, I want to amplify. So thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. I better give some, where do people find out, other than me sharing it on social media or maybe a link, where do people find out about that land acknowledgement session?
Yeah, so you can go to Community Development Learning, Community Development Learning Initiative .ca, and you can find more about it there.
Great. And I see so many great people that you work with. So really amazing jobs or amazing work that the entire group is doing. And I just really encourage people to do this because, you know, I want to have nuanced conversation with people on land acknowledgement but for some people, like my one-on-one is still way more advanced than what they're ready for. Right. So I get it.
And I think it's I don't think it's a oh, this is something, you know, I think it's also about holding space for people who just don't, to your point, don't want to get it.
Sure.
And I think that there's like, I think it can be so, I mean, what I've seen you really show up for other people is in their shitty behavior. and like, I'm always like, and I remember being so impressed, like, oh, like I was in awe of it sometimes. And I think, but partially it's you know, people being intentionally messing things up, or just to like, you know, to make other people feel inferior. And I've seen that time and time again. And I just like, I want spaces for people. And sometimes people aren't doing it intentionally, but it's like, if you've come here to learn, then be in a position and posture to learn, and not raise your hand with well, I really don't like the smell of that, you know, but you've heard it before. And it's like, hey, well, I guess you need another place to go to learn and say those things, but then also not cause damage to the people who think, you know, smudging is sacred.
Yeah.
Because you can't. And so like, and all of the questions, right? I think that's something that I'm as someone who is a settler and who has been raised here and knows sort of the ways in which we can at least hold space for these conversations. I want to be able to like, yeah, I think we can do that here in a way that's hopefully, so that when people can come to your you know, if they were really thinking about this as levels, you know, come to your thing and say, I'm now in a position of learning from someone who has so much wisdom to give. Or also just like listen to the podcast and you can have your own opinions and thoughts, but still, you know, and not have to air them. I don't know, right? But there's so many ways that I think as that. And I think too, it's so many people are like, I'm not sure what to do. And so this is just one more avenue for people.
That's just it.
Then they
the
don't do
more, the
anything.
better, right? Like honestly, because there's so many conversations that are hard, awkward, and you just got to find the right place to try to have them. And you know, some things are so life changing. I can tell you, a community care session we did in Community Wise changed my life. Because I didn't realize that we as, you know, BIPOC getting together and talking about how awful these conversations can be.
That was,
like, it changed my life. I'm like, my God, we're not alone. And I didn't know. Right.
Yep. Yes. Yeah. And, you know, I kind of, you know, I've been reflecting on those days a little bit of, for those of you, I guess, who don't know, like anti-racism organizational change through Community Wise. And there's some really great resources, and you've highlighted them here on your show, but the level of like how necessary those spaces are. And, you know, we would go into different circles based on different identities as well, to sort of talk and engage, like, what does this mean? And I think when you know, this is some of the work around like mutual aid, but like when shit happens, shit will continue to happen. But when you are in solidarity with other people in community, you can respond differently to it. You're not alone. You have a relationship with people go, hey, like, another, another murdered and missing Indigenous woman was found.
Yeah.
And like, I'm going to come with you on May 5th because it matters, because we're in relationship with each other. Right. Like we're going to do those things together. And so like the more relationality we have in these safer spaces, really important, without sort of like the guise of like a nonprofit or like the white gaze of like being like, ooh, what's going on over there? And really being able to just like be with each other in love and in lightness, but also in some of those heavier times too, I think are incredibly important. And I miss those times. So I'm always wondering, anyway.
I know.
Maybe,
I tried to create like
another event.
Right. I tried to create Zooms, and that didn't end up working on Sunday nights for like all of us to get together.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I got to figure this out. But honestly, it was just that I just want to encourage people to consider going to this event or a Jane Walk or something that this group has been doing, because like if I had a life-changing event like that and I'm Indigenous, imagine as a settler what you could learn, what could happen from that. So I just really appreciate you putting that together for us, Tyson, and knowing and promoting it here so that I can promote it in my circles too, especially to folks who want to have those conversations but are way too afraid to have it with me, because like you said, I will call them out.
and honestly, I will say this, it's great, by the way. It's I sometimes will watch when like the news will tell you, or like, oh, who do we reach out to, and they go to like you essentially about a particular topic, and sometimes I can hear the podcast version of what you want to say to these people, and I just it makes me so happy sometimes knowing that like they just and you're like, just do these things or be this way, and there's usually no response necessarily, but it's like it's just very clear. And I just wonder what would the podcast version of that be, and so it always makes me smile knowing that they thought that they were just given, oh, that was really radical, when really it's not at all, but it's definitely I find it very, very quite funny.
I'm just glad I have somebody else who gets my joke once in a while anyway.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Always.
Or can feel the tingle in my eyes, the twinkle, I should say, but knows I want to say this, but I'll say this. Right on. Well, thank you, Tyson. Yes. And by the way, as I do my exit, which I know you've heard many times, feel free to chime in if you hear anything else that we should really be plugging to, because it matters to me. Anyway, for folks who don't know, we have a book club. We're going to be doing the actual calls to justice for the next book club. So we've basically been dissecting the MMIW report into sections, and then this section coming up is the calls to justice. So hopefully with some context, people will, look at it differently. So, and also if you're in the Calgary area, Reconciliation Action Group, but whether you're a part of a book club or a reconciliation committee, no matter where you are in Alberta, Ontario, nationally, just join one. See if you can start, as Tyson so eloquently said, be in these spaces that, will really kind of help change your perspective and create these safer spaces. I'm proud that this podcast has included cultural safety training, cultural first aid, and all of them to create a safer space for Indigenous, Black people, people of color, those with disabilities, and 2S LGBTQ to speak. Heretohelp.bc.ca, what is Indigenous cultural safety and why I should care about it? So literally Google that. You might find even more resources, which are fabulous. I want to say thank you to Cheryl Ward, Chelsea Branch, and Alicia Fritkin of that heretohelp.bc for writing that. Their work is cultural action tools. So please support Indigenous work like that as part of your reconciliation and settler understandings. And I'm just lucky enough to repeat them here. Internalized racism and lateral violence is another form of violence Indigenous people and marginalized people experience by the structure of oppression on these lands. So you can go to racialequitytools.org, and Donna Bevins created this, what is internalized racism? There's so much resource files there. I just love them all. So they help me too. Do's and don'ts for bystander intervention by American Friends Service Committee. You can check that out. I'm pretty sure I just checked their website and they had even more like videos and stuff too. So Indigenous people, Black people have been talking about these issues, sharing our traumas in reports, commissions, public hearings, just so it can be regularly disregarded. No more. Honor our words, honor the treaties, listen to politicians and their policies and platforms. If they don't recognize the marginalized in their budget with gender equity plus, if they're cutting violence prevention programs, Indigenous education, uterus health choices, gay straight alliances, attacking libraries, lack of human rights for migrants, immigrants, and folks with disabilities, know that your vote to that party directly negatively impacts marginalized people. Demand that they implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, the recommendation of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, the multiple reports about child welfare reform, violence prevention, 231 calls to justice from the National Inquiry, and now provincially we have 113 pathways to justice. So
113.
Yeah, they took the 231 and somehow got it down to 113 provincially, but whatever, we're working on it. And then, the succession from Kenny to Smith, now they have a new Premier's Council, which I've seen zero work done. And then a couple of days ago, they had this multicultural committee, and apparently they do have one Native on there, a Jimmy. So that's good. But at the same time, I'm like, so just before an election, you're calling a multicultural committee. Why don't we talk? Go ahead.
So, I was gonna say something, not to disrupt your closer, but something that I have really, as every time I listen to your podcast, it's always a reminder to me when you say, I don't speak on behalf of all Indigenous people. You're only from your experience. That for me has always been a consistent weekly reminder of I do not speak for all Black people. I do not speak for all gay people. I do not speak for all Calgarians. I don't speak for that. I speak from my experience and how important it is that it's tokenism, but what we're talking about having nuanced ways in which more than just one. And I'm always very hesitant, and similar, I'm sure with you, where people go, who do we call? Michelle. And it's like, which inherently isn't bad because you have so many great things to say, but also it's like, there are others. Are there other folks? What does that look like? And thinking about, I'm always very cautious, I think, sometimes of how I may be being seen as maybe the only one doing particular things. Because sometimes I might be, and a lot of that might be about access and privilege and things like this too. But it's something that I'm always reminded of, is how important it is that I can't be the only one taking up particular space or different, because I don't have all of the whole experience. And so just back to the multicultural provincial panel, what have you, of I'm sure their one event will be great, but but it is that kind of more, right? And more at the table, more at the table, making those decisions.
Well, and for me, why are we having this multicultural committee when we haven't done this work on the new Premier's Council on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls work? There's been zero announcements since that's been said. So it's like, what are you really doing? Right. And now you have a man who's at this table, which is totally fine. But that bigger picture that I know this whole conversation is totally then out of the conversation, which is wrong, because it should be at the forefront. Same with TRC. And I just know it's, the blue way of whitewashing. But, sometimes good can come from it, even if it's one thing. But man, fighting this institution is insane.
Well, I always say, I think there's always, there's people say, oh, there's more room and there's more seats at the table. And I go, actually, no, the seat, the table is the right size. People just need to leave the table and invite other people in. People need to just get out of the room, don't come back. The room isn't getting any bigger. That's actually very white supremacist culture of bigger and better is more. And we actually just need to people need to be sacrificial or whatever sacrificial. They just need to just go and make room for other people.
Well, and go to this space that we're talking about land acknowledgement and such. Why be at a comfortable position over here about something that you don't experience? Why wouldn't you go over here and unpack white supremacy, settler supremacy? Why?
That is because no, that's so perfect, because it is that's the learning, growth, being challenged space where I think we all want to, like, as human beings, I think we would, wow, that this actually feels like, oh, change is happening, versus to your point about being in a place that makes you feel comfortable. Yeah, that's great stuff.
Yeah. Oh, I appreciate it. And I love you chiming in, because you, out of all people, know exactly what I'm talking about, because you work within these systems every day. So, municipally, we have the White Goose Flying report. And so, just all of these reports, denying them is a form of abuse called gaslighting. Our people
Mhm.
are experiencing extreme racism in the justice, educational, social, church institutions, with multiple reports that say the same thing. Demand change from election platforms and politicians. If they don't understand colonialism, racism, privilege, sexism, they have zero business running. This should be understood by all parties, local politicians, community organizations, church groups, sports clubs. Google articles on how non-Indigenous Canadians can become allies, because there's actually multiple of them. Stephanie Harp and I did an emergency podcast in the hopes that we could reach our allies to write about the crisis that we're facing. We also talked about the aboriginalalert.ca. You can sign up there. You can go to Missing Children Society of Canada and download their app so that you're aware of looking for people in that moment. And Tyson, I see, grab something, and I will allow you a moment here to show us what it is you grabbed. Decolonize. Nice. How cool is that?
It's a book by Natalia Michelle Nani, and it's something that in CDLI that we've been, over the years, and something that I reflect back on often. It's like a workbook, but it has been very helpful in my own understanding and journey around so many different ways around how I've been told to think about work-life balance, wellness, perfectionism,
Mm,
who I'm accountable for, always sort of like decolonize this particular thing. And I found it to be really, really helpful in my own journey around this as well. Back to just sort of this idea of like, where do we start? What does it mean? What does it look like? So anyway, it's just another really great
resource for
resource
us.
that
Thank you.
I've been very that I share with folks.
Yeah, it's a really effective. I think that that's what matters, is that it helps. Like, I was talking to Kinsdale in our last podcast, and
Hmm.
she does this Indigenous book club for girls. And,
Hmm.
sometimes that one book or that one whatever, even sometimes it's a poem, just
Mm.
changes your world's perspective. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Another one that we were talking about with Stephanie Harp was this women's homelessness.ca, demanding urgent access to protect the lives of Indigenous women, girls, two-spirit, and gender diverse people experiencing homelessness. And I shared what happened today, like just down the road from me where I was walking. Anyway, this government's failure to respond properly to the crisis of
Yeah.
drug crisis is costing people's lives, taxpayers using scarce resources to our overburdened ambulance and hospital systems. Please start getting housing. If you know anybody using substances, please do not use alone. If you are using alone, there is the National Overdose Response Service at 1-888-688-NORS, or download the Brave or Doors app. But ultimately, it's about making safety plans. If you were in domestic violence situation, we would be encouraging safety plans. If you're using drugs, please don't use alone. And if you are, create a plan. And you can learn more about this all the time. We share this information, but biggest thing right now happening in Alberta is forced Christian prisons when it comes to addiction and homelessness. So
Hmm. Hmm.
my heart is with our community as we go through this. If you're experiencing emotional distress after anything we talked about today and want to talk, you can call the First Nation and Inuit Hope for Wellness helpline at 1-855-242-3310. You can also go to hopeforwellness.ca. They have a little text option there as well. And if more related to missing and murdered Indigenous women, you can go to 844-413-6649. For non-Indigenous, there are distress center lines in your area and usually a functioning 211, or you can call 855-456-4566 or text at 45645. And you can go to crisisservicescanada.ca to learn more. The 60 Scoop Society of Alberta is at ssisa.ca. The Indian Residential School Survivor and Family Hotline, 866-925-4419. Kids Help Phone, 1-800-668-6868. The Native Youth Crisis Hotline, 877-209-1266. And for LGBTQ2+, the Trevor Project, obviously, thank you, 866-844-7386. The Trans Lifeline in Canada, 877-330-6366, and lifevoice.ca has even more crisis supports and LGBTQ crisis supports. So please reference that if needed. Violence is my everyday reality. Every Indigenous generation has faced it. This is self-care, how I take my power back, how I heal. This is why I started the podcast, to speak freely without interruption, tone police, leadership shaming, gaslighting. I hope that other people are getting different perspectives by listening, but I'm tired of, talking to people who know nothing about Indigenous people, colonialism, and constant surveillance of our people, our protests, our vigil in our rights. I and many others share information on racism daily, so it's just unacceptable anymore. Learn about being trauma informed. It is shocking to me how many people don't understand trauma informed care. And it's so necessary, so that when people, are being attacked, are you being attacked or is that a trauma response, right? And being more kind and gentle with people and trying to meet them where they're at. Folks like me are dealing with internalized racism, gatekeeping, external racism, and folks that survive off the status quo, people who are in their trauma, they stop people from doing the work. They deplete personal resources. All the effort it takes into attacking each other should always be directed at tackling oppression dynamics from the structures, not each other. Anyway, internal and external racism is an everyday reality for me, Indigenous peoples, folks with disabilities, QT, BIPOC, and others. Masi Cho to my ancestors, to my granny and my mom, of what strength looks like through your example. I'm just going to stop right there and acknowledge my grandpa just passed, and my family is leaving today to go to Yellowknife. And my thoughts and prayers are with my own family right now, wishing I could be with them, but knowing that it's a really complicated death for our family, and folks who are from Yellowknife understand why. So I just hope that people can be gentle to the Powless family for the next little while. Anyway, I want to thank my dad for teaching me to be blunt and strong, my stepmom for showing me what a proud culture is through her Austrian family and roots, and stepping up to teaching me to be how to be a proud Calgarian. It is through her I am a second generation. And to my husband, Big Buffalo Rockman, for producing and editing the show, on top of being my husband, my childhood friend, father of our child, and support down my journey of the Red Road. He has witnessed decades of sexism and racism. And to our child, Thunderpipe Necklace Woman, we are blessed to learn from you. And every day we are honored you chose us. You give me daily accountability to be a better and stronger person. My hope is that my daughter and my family will be proud in the future of us trying to discuss these present day issues in a way that they can understand down the road. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. To those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or questions. I also have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe. Go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. And on my birthday, I put out a birthday wish to go to Ottawa on May 4th. And I want to honor those of you who were able to donate to me. I am going, and I just want to say thank you for that. I have been acclaimed as the operations chair for the Indigenous Peoples Commission, so I'm excited for that. And we also have a breakfast coming up, and the donations go to Indigenous candidates that run for us. And May 5th is Red Dress Day. I encourage everyone nationally to support your local Indigenous community by attending the May 5th Red Dress events if they are having them in that area. And if you cannot, just put a red dress or maybe a cutout in your window, anything to show that support, because we appreciate it. But more importantly, the families of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit, they when they see these types of actions, that helps them. So I say thank you from the bottom of my heart for your kindness, for your donation, and for showing up. And you said it so well, Tyson, why it matters that people show up and get into these spaces and be challenged. So thank you. And I want to end by giving side eye to those Calgary rabbits. You're lucky I'm not Tradish. And my beautiful cousin responded, or you'd be in my dish.
My dish.
Thank you for listening.
For
right. Thanks for being on my show, Tyson.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Love you lots.
Oh, vice versa.